December 1964, a small apartment in Detroit. Marvin Gaye sat alone in the dark, holding a wedding invitation he couldn't bring himself to open. Harvey Fuqua was getting remarried. The man who had discovered him, mentored him, brought him to Motown, believed in him when no one else did. The invitation was formal, impersonal. No phone call, no personal note, just printed letters on expensive paper that said, "You are invited." But Marvin knew what it really said. "You are not forgiven." 4 years had passed since Marvin made the choice that changed everything. 4 years since he betrayed the only man who had ever seen him as more than just another voice, another product, another commodity. And in those 4 years, Marvin had gained everything. A record deal, fame, money, a marriage into the most powerful family in black music. But he had lost something he would spend the rest of his life trying to replace: trust, mentorship. The feeling that someone believed in him not because of what he could become, but because of who he was. Harvey Fuqua never spoke to him the same way again. And Marvin never stopped hearing Harvey's last words to him, whispered in a hallway outside a Motown recording session in 1961. Words that would echo through every decision Marvin made for the next 23 years. "You married into the family, Marvin, not into love. You chose power over loyalty, and you'll carry that choice for the rest of your life." To understand why those words destroyed Marvin, you need to go back to 1958, to a moment when Marvin Gaye was nobody. He was 19 years old, standing outside the Howard Theater in Washington, D.C., watching Harvey Fuqua and the Moonglows perform. Marvin had been singing in doo-wop groups since 14, church groups mostly, street corner harmonies with neighborhood kids who had voices but no direction. He had talent. Everyone said so. But talent in 1958 meant nothing without a path. His father, a Pentecostal minister, considered secular music the devil's work. So Marvin sang in secret, dreaming of a life beyond the church, beyond the beatings, beyond the constant message that he was worthless. The Moonglows were everything Marvin wanted to be: smooth, sophisticated, professional. When their performance ended, Marvin approached Harvey backstage. He didn't have a plan. He just knew that if he didn't try, he would regret it forever. Harvey was packing equipment when Marvin walked up. "Mr. Fuqua, I can sing. Better than anyone you've heard. Give me 30 seconds and I'll prove it." Harvey didn't look up. "Kid, I've heard that line 100 times this month. Everyone can sing. What makes you different?" Marvin didn't answer with words. He just started singing. No accompaniment, no warm-up. Just his voice, raw and aching, filling the empty theater. He sang a Moonglow song, sincerely, but he sang it differently, with a vulnerability that made it sound like a confession rather than a performance. Harvey stopped packing. He turned around and looked at Marvin for the first time. Really looked. And what he saw was a kid who was terrified and desperate and burning with something that couldn't be taught. Harvey knew that look. He had worn it himself once. "What's your name?" "Marvin. Marvin Gaye." Harvey nodded slowly. "All right, Marvin Gaye. You're hired. Pack your bags. We leave for Chicago tomorrow." That moment changed Marvin's life, but it also created a debt that Marvin would eventually repay with betrayal. For the next 2 years, Marvin traveled with the Moonglows. Harvey didn't just give him a job. He gave him an education. He taught Marvin how to read contracts, negotiate with venues, protect his publishing rights, survive in an industry designed to exploit young black artists. Harvey treated Marvin like a younger brother. He fronted him money when Marvin couldn't afford food. He defended him when other group members questioned whether a 19-year-old belonged on stage with them. And Marvin worshipped him. Harvey was everything Marvin's father wasn't: encouraging, patient, generous. Harvey saw potential where Marvin's father saw sin. For the first time in his life, Marvin felt like he mattered. But the Moonglows were falling apart. By 1960, the group's sound was becoming dated. Doo-wop was dying. Rock and roll was evolving. Harvey knew they needed to adapt or disappear, so he made a decision. He would move to Detroit and join forces with Gordy, a young entrepreneur who was building something new, a record label called Motown, a hit factory, a place where black artists could have unprecedented control and success. Harvey brought Marvin with him. "You're too talented to waste, kid. Detroit is where your career really starts. In Detroit, Harvey introduced Marvin to his girlfriend, Gordy. She was Gordy's sister, beautiful and sharp. Marvin was still a shy kid from Washington, still carrying his father's condemnation, still unsure of his place in rooms full of confident people. But Gwen saw something in him. They started dating. Harvey encouraged it. Harvey, Gwen, and Marvin became a unit, a family. And Marvin, for the first time, felt like he belonged somewhere. But belonging can feel like a cage when you're ambitious. And Marvin was ambitious in ways he didn't fully understand yet. The first time Marvin met Gordy, he felt something shift. Anna was Gwen's older sister, 17 years older than Marvin, sophisticated, powerful, connected to every major player at Motown through her brother Barry. She was everything Gwen wasn't: established, untouchable, safe. Marvin was 21. Anna was 38. The age gap should have made the attraction impossible. But for Marvin, the age gap was part of the appeal. Anna didn't need him. She didn't need anyone. And Marvin had spent his entire life trying to prove his worth to people who had power over him. His father, Harvey, Motown. Anna represented a different kind of relationship. If he could win her, he could prove that he was more than just a talented kid. He could prove that he was worthy of respect. He didn't think about what it would cost. He didn't think about Harvey, who had saved him. He didn't think about Gwen, who loved him. He only thought about himself, about what marrying Gordy would mean for his career, his status, his escape from the powerlessness that had defined his entire childhood. The breakup with Gwen was quiet. No screaming, no drama, just Marvin sitting her down and saying, "I can't do this anymore." Gwen didn't fight. She just looked at him with sad, knowing eyes and said, "You're making a mistake, Marvin, but you won't realize it until it's too late." Harvey found out the same day. He showed up at Marvin's apartment, and for the first time since they'd met, there was no warmth in his face, just cold disappointment. "You're leaving Gwen for Anna." It wasn't a question. Marvin nodded. Harvey didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You married into the family, Marvin, not into love. You chose power over loyalty. You used Gwen to get close to Motown, and now you're trading her for someone with more connections. Do you even hear yourself when you talk about Anna? You don't talk about love. You talk about opportunity." Marvin tried to defend himself. "It's not like that, Harvey. I care about Anna. You care about what she can do for you." Harvey's voice was flat, final. "And that's fine. That's the business. But don't pretend it's something else. Don't lie to yourself. You made a choice. You chose the Gordy name over the woman who actually loved you. You chose access over integrity, and you'll carry that choice for the rest of your life." Harvey walked out, and from that moment on, their relationship was different. Professional but distant, polite but cold. Harvey continued to work at Motown. Marvin continued to build his career. But the mentorship was over. The belief was gone. And Marvin felt the absence like a wound that wouldn't close. Marvin married Gordy in June 1961. The wedding was small, private. Barry Gordy attended, Gwen did not, Harvey did not. And Marvin stood at the altar next to a woman who was brilliant and powerful and completely wrong for him, knowing that he had made a calculation rather than a commitment. The marriage lasted 13 years. 13 years of fighting, infidelity, resentment. Anna controlled every aspect of Marvin's career. She made decisions without consulting him. She reminded him constantly that she had given him access to a world he never could have entered on his own. And Marvin resented her for it, because she was right. He had married her for what she represented. And she knew it. They both knew it. It was the foundation of their entire relationship. Transactional, strategic, empty. There were nights when Marvin would lie awake next to Anna, staring at the ceiling, wondering what his life would have looked like if he had stayed with Gwen. Would he have been happy? Would he have felt less alone? He would never know, because he had made his choice, and choices, once made, close all the other doors. Anna was not cruel. She was practical. She had married Marvin knowing exactly who he was and what he wanted. She gave him what he had asked for: access, proximity to power, protection from the industry's worst predators. But she couldn't give him what he actually needed: the feeling that someone loved him for who he was, not for what he could become. That was the thing Marvin searched for his entire life, and the thing he destroyed every time he got close to finding it. The fighting between Marvin and Anna wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. Passive-aggressive silences, separate bedrooms, long stretches where they communicated only through lawyers and managers. Anna would go weeks without speaking to Marvin directly. Marvin would disappear into the studio, recording songs about love and connection, while his own marriage crumbled in slow motion. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was singing about intimacy he had never experienced. Romance he had traded away for ambition. And Harvey knew. Everyone at Motown knew. The marriage was a business arrangement that had turned into a prison. Marvin couldn't leave because Anna controlled too much of his career. Anna couldn't leave because Marvin was too profitable. They were trapped together by contracts and resentment, and the weight of a choice made in 1960 that neither of them could undo. And through all of it, Marvin carried Harvey's words: "You married into the family, not into love." By the time Marvin recorded What's Going On in 1970, he and Harvey barely spoke. They passed each other in Motown hallways. They attended the same meetings. But the distance between them was infinite. Harvey had moved on. He had his own projects, his own artists. He didn't need Marvin anymore. But Marvin needed him, needed his approval, needed to prove that the choice he had made in 1960 hadn't been a mistake. He never got that validation, because Harvey never forgave him. Not publicly, not privately. Harvey Fuqua lived until 2010, long enough to see Marvin become a legend, long enough to see Marvin's tragic death in 1984. And in interviews, when people asked Harvey about discovering Marvin Gaye, he always said the same thing: "I gave him his first chance, but he made his own choices after that." It was a carefully neutral statement, but Marvin, had he been alive to hear it, would have understood the subtext. Harvey had given him everything, and Marvin had chosen ambition over loyalty. In 1983, 1 year before his death, Marvin did an interview where he was asked about his biggest regret. The interviewer expected him to talk about drugs, or his failed marriages, or his fractured relationship with his father. But Marvin surprised everyone. "Harvey Fuqua," he said quietly, "I betrayed the man who believed in me, and I've been trying to earn that belief back my entire career. But you can't earn back something you threw away. You can only live with the loss." The wedding invitation in 1964 was Harvey's final message. You are invited, but not forgiven. Marvin never attended the wedding. He couldn't, because attending would mean facing Harvey. And facing Harvey would mean admitting what he had known for years but couldn't say out loud. He had chosen wrong. He had married Anna for the Gordy name, for access to Barry, for proximity to power. And in doing so, he had destroyed the one pure mentorship he ever had. Harvey had seen him, really seen him, not as a product or a commodity or a strategic asset, but as a kid with a voice and a dream. And Marvin had traded that for a marriage that made him miserable, and a career that left him feeling empty. The debt was never repaid. The trust was never rebuilt. And Marvin spent the rest of his life creating music that screamed with the loneliness of someone who had everything except the one thing he actually needed. Someone who believed in him not because of what he could become, but because of who he was. Harvey Fuqua gave Marvin Gaye his start, but Marvin gave Harvey a reason to stop believing in mentorship. And both of them carried that loss until the day they died. When Marvin was shot by his father on April 1st, 1984, Harvey heard the news on the radio. He was in his car, driving through Detroit, and the announcement came through like static. Marvin Gaye, dead at 44. Harvey pulled over to the side of the road and sat in silence. He didn't cry. He just sat there, hands on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. People asked him later how he felt, what he thought, whether he had any regrets. Harvey's answer was always the same. I gave him his first chance. What he did with it was his choice. But late at night when Harvey was alone, he thought about that kid outside the Howard Theater in 1958, 19 years old, terrified, desperate for someone to believe in him. Harvey had believed he had invested time, money, energy into building Marvin's career. He had treated him like family, and Marvin had repaid him by choosing power over loyalty. Harvey never said this publicly. He never spoke bitterly about Marvin in interviews. He was too professional for that. But the people close to Harvey knew. They saw the way his face tightened when Marvin's name came up. They heard the careful, neutral tone he used when discussing their history. They understood that some betrayals don't heal. They just scar over. And Marvin? Marvin died knowing he had never repaid the debt, never rebuilt the trust, never earned back what he had thrown away in 1960. He died alone, shot by his father in the same house where all his childhood trauma had originated. And maybe that was fitting, because Marvin had spent his entire life running from one father figure to another, searching for approval he could never find. Harvey had been the first, and Marvin had destroyed that relationship for a marriage that made him miserable, and a career that left him empty. The tragedy wasn't that Marvin died young. The tragedy was that he spent 44 years trying to fill a void he had created himself. A void shaped exactly like the mentorship he had betrayed.